Okay, so I am doing this because, as I had mentioned, this is the number one question that I am getting right now. People hear a lot of conflicting information. They heard interest rates are going down. They heard maybe prices are going down. Should they wait? Should they be buying now? What's the right thing to do? So, we're going to try to shed some light on that and just give you some good information. We'll try to breeze through this fairly quickly. So, here's what we're going to talk about today: what's going on in real estate, interest rates, the market, and a little bit of hopefully what we know and what we think is going to happen in the future. Is now a good time or a bad time to buy? We'll go into the reasons for those things. Get you some access to affordable homes. That is one thing that everybody always wants to hear about, and there are some really good news things there. Tips on how to get there when you're ready. So you may be thinking you're ready now. You may be on a lease for the next 9 months or 12 months. Whatever your situation looks like, we'll just give you some real easy, basic tips on how to get there if it's not today. And then some free things and some pretty cool things that we're doing that we will be giving away. You'll have the opportunity to get. So you'll want to stick around to the end for that. So, really quickly, in case you don't know us, here's a little bit about us. My name is Matt Meyer. I'm a realtor and broker. 15 years in real estate. I actually started out flipping, investing, still have three rentals here. Don't do flips necessarily anymore, but still have three rentals here. And then I have a place in Utah that we mostly Airbnb. Licensed since 2013, helping other people buy, sell, invest, all those kind of good things. And then been a broker since 2020. My background is in construction. I'm also a certified trustee agent and trained by a master appraiser. Jenna, my wife, makes up the other half of the Meyer team. She is born and raised right here in Las Vegas, graduated from UNLV. She's got a background in marketing and advertising, does some really cool stuff for us, and has been a realtor since 2018, just killing it. So let's jump into it. What is going on in the market now? So some of this you may have heard, some of it you're not maybe totally sure, and a lot of what you see on the news is national news. So mostly what we're going to be talking about, I will have a few national slides because it's good to know those trends, but mostly what we're going to be talking about is what's going on here in Vegas, because that's what affects us, what's going on in the valley. So inventory in single family, 29% higher than the same time last year. So there are more homes for sale. That's been a trend that's been going up for about the last 6 months. It's really kind of leveled out the last two. Most of the shift, if I can call it that, happened between essentially April and June. That's really kind of when our inventory grew. And then the last couple of months, it's been relatively stable, hasn't necessarily gotten better or worse. In condo townhome, I will tell you this is higher. Condo townhome, it's about 54% higher. So it kind of depends on the product type you're looking for. But in single family, 29% higher. Condo townhome, lots more options. Lots more options. Prices relatively flat. The median home price, so we're talking year over year. So as of today, it is August 29th. So basically a year ago, in the median price, which median and average are slightly different numbers, I'll kind of talk about more, but median is up just slightly. So essentially prices are flat from the same time last year. Average price is down about 2%. Now the average price fluctuates month to month because, if you had one really big sale or a couple of really big sales, that can kind of throw off what that average price is. But in any case, what we're probably looking at is basically flat prices from the same time last year, maybe even have gone down in the last 3 months a little bit to kind of get back to that number. So prices are definitely trending flat to slightly down. Houses are taking longer to sell. That's to be expected with more on the market. Today, 40 days on market compared to the same time last year. It was 30 days on market. And new homes have more inventory now than at any point in the past 10 years. There's a couple of very interesting trends and some interesting things that are happening because of it to do with new homes that we're going to get into. So here is kind of the interesting thing about all of this, because what you'll hear on the news is, why is there more inventory? Why are prices maybe going down a little bit? And they keep saying, well, it's because interest rates are so high. Well, kind of yes and no. So obviously that's a big part of it, but this is essentially our median sales price going back for about the last 3 years. So as you can see, this first half of 2022, prices were still going up really quickly. This is kind of the end of really low interest rates. Even in the beginning of 2022, you still saw interest rates down in the threes. And then essentially it was around March of 2022 that the Fed started raising interest rates and mortgage rates started going up. And then that's kind of why you saw this leveling off. So this happened in roughly May or June of 2022. And you started to see prices go down. And that was because of interest rates, 100%. In about a 6 to 9 month window, we went from a 3% interest rate up to about a 7% interest rate. So because of that, you had this initial shock to the system where prices dropped. But as you can see, prices basically dropped to where they were, maybe slightly below to start out 2022. They bottomed out basically towards the end of 22, beginning of 23, and then went back up. We really only had about a 6-month window here where prices went down. Now, is this because interest rates got better and prices started going back up? Not at all. Interest rates were essentially the same or worse for basically most of 2023, 2024. So we were looking anywhere between 7, sometimes even high 7s for parts of that time period. But essentially, you started to see prices go back up because basically people kind of got used to it. And more importantly, a lot of sellers just weren't putting their houses on the market. A lot of sellers were saying, I have a 3% interest rate. I'm going to stay in my house. I'm not going to go up to that 7.5% interest rate. So even though there was probably less buyers, prices continued to go up even because of that, just because most people still weren't selling houses. And for prices to go down, you need more houses out on the market. So this is kind of the interesting thing. So here's where we are today. Prices have, again, kind of just leveled out here for about the last 6 months to a year. And that's kind of where we're at. And a lot of that is because of the interest rates, but really it's just kind of caught up to the fact that we're starting to see some more houses come on the market. And those are mostly just people that have to sell. So will there be a market crash? This is one of the other big questions I get. There's more inventory. I hear there's less buyers. Everybody's waiting. This is kind of the narratives that you hear on the news. So does this mean there's a crash coming? Two big reasons that is not very likely to happen. First one here is this little stat, and this is a good stat to know. So the average homeowner has $300,000 in equity nationally. So that doesn't mean their house is worth $300,000. That means they have equity of $300,000. That is the national stat at this point. So why is it very, very, very unlikely to crash? Because when people have a lot of equity, they're not going to just dump their house for nothing. A lot of sellers, what we're starting to see is they're just kind of waiting this out. If they can't get what they think they want for their house, or they don't necessarily have to sell, they're just not selling their house. And that's because they're sitting on that equity. Now, 2008, totally different deal. In 2008, the average homeowner equity before the crash started was probably 50,000, 40,000, something like that. So what you had was an initial 10 to 15% correction, but essentially it wiped out all of that equity. So very, very few people actually had equity unless they'd been in their house for a long time. And that's when you started to see the wave of foreclosures and people walking away from homes because essentially they owed way more on the house than what it was even worth. So that's the big difference here between 2008 and what we're looking at today is that equity. And then as you can see, because of that, only 0.13% of homes have filed for foreclosure. Now, that doesn't mean they actually got foreclosed on. It just means that they filed for foreclosure. So there's a notice of default, there's a notice of sale, there's a whole process that goes into that. And a lot of these folks, to be honest with you, are generally somebody has passed away and nobody's paying the mortgage, or some kind of a weird life circumstance. We are seeing statistically insignificant levels of foreclosure rates. To give you an idea of what this looked like during a real crash, in about a 3-year window from 2008 to 2011, there was over half of the homes in Las Vegas that got foreclosure notices. So this is just completely night and day. Right now, we are still less than 0.25% of people in a 6-month window that were getting a foreclosure notice. So will the market crash? Not really. Sellers are just willing to wait out the market. So delistings are really what we're starting to see. You can kind of see on this chart here. Basically, what we're starting to see now is people just saying, I don't have to sell if I'm not going to get my price. I just pull my house off the market and I'm going to wait. And that's the other reason that the prices aren't necessarily crashing, because people aren't necessarily desperate because they don't have to be. So is now a good time to buy? This is always a very nuanced conversation. And I have it individually with people kind of based on their circumstance, because based on your own individual circumstance, there's a lot that you should be thinking about. You should be thinking about how long do you plan to stay in the house? How long do you plan to stay in Vegas? Some other more personal things, but just in general, that's what we're going to talk about on this. So the pros of right now buying compared to maybe a couple of years ago, lots of options. People in 2021 and early 2022, they were getting into houses with these really low interest rates. But the problem was it was such a feeding frenzy because everybody could afford to buy that a lot of people bought houses they didn't necessarily like. It was just what they could get into. I saw people putting offers on houses that weren't nice houses at all. But they had to still make competitive offers because there just wasn't anything out there because people were just snatching up properties left and right. So right now, you're going to get the opportunity to get kind of your pick of the litter to some degree. Really nice houses that are priced well are still going to sell somewhat decent in this market, but lots of options for buyers. This is the biggest one. Sellers are willing to make massive concessions. And we're going to kind of talk about what that means and how you can utilize that to your advantage as a buyer. But this is probably what makes buying now the most attractive, is because of those concessions. And then teaser interest rates. And this is primarily through builders, although we do have some programs that you can do this even on resales, where essentially you can get a artificially lower interest rate. And when I say artificially, I'm not talking about an adjustable rate mortgage, although I have seen some builders even offering adjustable rate mortgages again. Now, those are kind of a different story because those are things that can kind of reset and cause problems later. But I'm just talking about basically the owner or the builder essentially paying to lower your interest rate, which can be done, and it saves you a ton of money as a buyer. So the cons, this is really the number one thing that I hear from people, is just affordability concerns. So we talk about, are these problems that we can solve? So this is the next follow-up question I'll always get, is should I wait? So the pros of waiting, prices could be slightly lower, depending on how quickly the interest rates drop. We're already down. I'm seeing rates in the low sixes now. I think the median rate is just below 6.5. Depending on the loan program and everything, I've seen people even in the fives. But let's just say, for the sake of an easy number, the median interest rate right now is about 6.4. So depending on how long it takes to get that down into the fives for everybody, could prices continue to go down slightly? It's possible. It's very hard to predict pricing right now because of how unpredictable everything is with tariffs and some of the things that are going on with the government. So I think pricing projections are a little tough to do at the moment, but you could definitely say there's a chance that they could be lower. Interest rates are projected to go down. Now, again, totally true. Interest rates are projected to go down, but we'll have some more information on this. Nobody that I've seen of any kind of a forecast or anything is predicting a steep drop in interest rates. The Fed has come out and said they're finally going to drop interest rates in September, but it's a quarter point. Now, for contrast, in 2022, when they were doing interest rate increases, they were doing half-point interest rate increases. They were doing 0.75% increases. They were increasing it really quickly, which is why you saw that drop off in prices, because it was kind of a shock to the system. What they're talking about doing is a very slow ease. They're worried about, overheating the economy and inflation. They're worried about tariffs. They're worried about all kinds of different things, to where the Fed, as they lower interest rates and as the banks go with them, it's going to be a very subtle thing. Nobody thinks it's going to happen quickly. So the cons of waiting: as rates go down, sellers and builders will reduce their concessions and incentives. The reason that sellers are willing to make huge incentives, the last buyer that we just closed got $17,000 in closing costs from the seller. That's a crazy number. I've never seen that before. The reason that seller is willing to do that, or that a builder is willing to buy down your interest rate or offer you closing costs and buy down your interest rate, is because they're trying to move homes. They want to get the home sold. As soon as the rates go down to a certain point where a lot of people jump back into the market and there's more buyers, they're not going to have any reason to do those things anymore. So could your interest rate be a quarter point lower, half point lower? Sure. But those incentives, which, if you're doing it the smart way, could mean more to you, are going to be gone. And it's kind of the same thing. Buffett, I think, talks a lot about this. If everybody's doing something, he's always kind of cautious of following the crowd. And this is kind of the same thing with waiting to buy. If everybody, or a majority of people, everybody's the narrative out there, there's still plenty of people buying. But if a majority of people are waiting to jump back in, and they all kind of jump back in at the same time, which a lot of forecasts that I see are basically when it gets to right around 6, maybe just below 6 into the 5s, is when they think that kind of the dam's going to break, of people jumping back into the market and all kind of going to buy at the same time. The problem is, now all of those people are competing against each other. So the sellers are not going to have any real need to reduce things. We could even start seeing multiple offers on homes again. So that's going to be the tough thing. And then the biggest thing, in the meantime, you're going to stay a renter. And again, it could be 3 months before we get into the fives. It could be a year before we get into the fives, because most people are projecting that interest rates are going to go down pretty slowly. Nobody's saying this is going to happen overnight. So this is one thing I like to show people. And I'm not saying every single person should own. For certain people, and again, this is a conversation that I have one-on-one with folks, for certain people, renting may make sense in the short term. It's never going to make sense in the long term, but in the short term, it might. But the biggest thing is that they don't really teach us exactly how this works in school. There's part of this math that nobody really seems to get unless somebody teaches it to them. So this is one thing that I like to share with people. So right now, what I've done is just taken the median rent in Las Vegas and the median mortgage, and we're going to kind of compare them to just having apples and apples. And this is what a lot of folks look at, is they say the median rent is $2,300, which is not exactly cheap by any means, but it is less than the median mortgage of $2,700. And they say, well, I don't have to make any repairs, which could be true. You should always check your lease. A lot of times your lease says you are responsible for certain types of repairs. Usually the big ones have to be done by the owner, but that doesn't necessarily always mean no repairs at all. And just more affordable, because they look at that side by side and just say this is the better option. Now, here's the part that we don't do a great job of educating people on. So for those 12 months that I'm going to be paying that rent of $2,300, I'm going to pay $27,600, but I get zero tax write-offs. That $27,600 is just a cost of living. It's just a cost of being able to have shelter. That money goes away. I get absolutely nothing for it. And another thing, I just had somebody who was wanting to go from an apartment into renting a house, and she discovered this very quickly. It's very expensive even to get into rentals. 5,000 to 6,000 is the average in terms of deposits, because you're going to have a first month's rent. You're going to have a security deposit. This one in particular was charging a key fee, a pet fee, a processing fee. I mean, there was like 4 or 5 of these things. And I see a lot of these property management companies charging the same thing. So it's not exactly easy to get into a rental either. Like I said, on average in Vegas, it's 5,000 to 6,000 just in your upfront costs to get into the rental, not considering the rest of your rent. So to own, obviously we said that number is higher right now as far as the median. So that's going to get you to $32,400. But, and this is the part that we don't teach people, you get to write off 100% of your mortgage interest. Now, you don't get to write off your entire payment, but you get to write off all of your mortgage interest. You also get to write off closing costs that you pay. You get to write off depreciation. There's a lot of things that, as you own a home, really incentivize towards your taxes that we don't always talk to people about. Cost for entry could be as little as $3,000. If you're VA, it could be as little as $0. We've gotten a couple of VA people into homes here recently where they came out of pocket absolutely $0. They got their earnest money back at closing. So, not saying that's the same for everybody. Again, I always talk to people individually about what their circumstance is going to look like, but it doesn't have to be that hard to get into something. Now, here's what I was talking about when I'm talking about that mortgage write-off. Your first year, on average, because the way that mortgages are amortized, about 79% of your payment is going to be interest. They front load the interest on your loans. If you've never heard that, now you know. So roughly $25,600 of that first year's worth of payments is going to be stuff that you can write off. Now, again, I'm not even factoring in closing costs or anything else, because if you do pay closing costs, you can take those off dollar for dollar. There's some other things. I'm just talking about your payment. So really, in reality, for people, this is probably going to be better. But in this situation, we have a single person who's gotten into their first starter home here, making $70,000. And this is, again, something that we see all the time as far as the numbers. So your taxable income would drop from that $70,000 now down to the $44,400, because you're writing off $25,600. So if you rent, and you can see these tax rates at the bottom here. So basically, if I was making that $70,000, I fall into this tax bracket, the $48,476 to, basically $103,000. That means I'm paying 22%. So if I'm just renting, making $70,000, I'm paying 22% of that, which means I have about a $15,000 tax liability. If I own, I'm taxed at 12%. Now, why 12%? Because now I've dropped my taxable income from 70 down to 44. So I've gone from this 22% bracket. Now I'm down in this 12% bracket. So not only am I being taxed on less income, I'm also being taxed at a lower bracket. This happens all the time. So now I've gone from a $15,000 tax liability down to under $5,400. So I've saved $10,000 when I go to file my taxes. And again, this is not including your actual closing costs or other things that you may end up paying. So you can kind of see, if we look at this, now we go back to this true side-by-side comparison. If we just looked at this top number, renting looks like the way to go. If I'm renting here, I'm saving $5,000, roughly speaking. But when I'm taking in my tax savings, there's usually other things that you can write off your taxes. Obviously, talk to your CPA or somebody about that. But generally speaking, once you do this, you can kind of itemize instead of taking standard deductions. So usually it's going to be even better than this. I'm kind of making this a very safe comparison. Now again, instead of paying 32, really I'm paying the 22 because I've saved those taxes. So in reality, even though I'm making a higher monthly payments, I'm coming out over $5,000 ahead as opposed to renting. Plus, I'm paying down my mortgage, I'm building equity, I'm getting a whole lot of other advantages. So that's a huge thing. So we talked about concessions, and this is where we get into the affordable home section. I promised you access to affordable homes. These concessions are what makes homes affordable. So what is a concession? It can be a lot of different things. Could be covering closing costs, could be paying down the interest rate on your behalf, could be reducing the price. That's the one that makes the least amount of difference on your mortgage and really long term. The interest rate matters a lot more than even asking them to come down $10,000. That's not going to make much of a difference. Making repairs, that's definitely a thing that we're seeing on homes. And even offering home warranties. Builders are always going to have basically a full bumper-to-bumper warranty for the first year and then some level of a tiered warranty at that point. But you can even get home warranties on resales, and sellers are paying for those all day long. So that kind of takes away some of those concerns of these big purchases I may have to make down the road that I'm going to have to replace something or pay some big repair. I'm not saying there's not going to be some money there, but it definitely mitigates that huge, oh my God, I have this $5,000 expense. So why are people waiting and why are homes maybe not as affordable for them? This is the pretty easy chart. So this is just comparing what a mortgage looked like in 2019 to what it looks like today. Now you can see in those first 2 years, in 2020 and 2021, we had a jump in how much homes cost, which is this blue part. So this blue part of these bars is telling you how much the payment went up based because of the price of the home. But that was kind of offset because interest rates went down and stayed down so much during these 2 years. So you really only had a $12 net in 2020 because even though homes went up in value, there was a big drop in interest rates. And then even in 2021, it was only $152 more than it was in 2019 because again, while prices were going up very quickly, you can see the interest rate has as much to do with the affordability as anything. That's really what affects it more. So then we move into 2022 when interest rates went up. Well, we still had appreciation. So the appreciation was taking the payment up to $642. Now these are all compared to 2019. These are not year over year. So basically from 2019, you were paying $642 more, but really about a third of the increase was really this in the interest rates. As the interest rates went up, that's what really kind of contributed to the affordability issue. End of the day, I'm not going to go through every one of these. Essentially what this is saying is basically a home is costing $1,200 more per month. That's what the difference in mortgage is compared to 2019. Now, some of that is because of the price increases, and those probably won't really change. But you can see on here right now, more of the difference is coming from the actual interest rate than in these huge price increases. So this is the part that we can do something about. And this is how we have these solutions. So you can kind of get an idea here. This is slightly outdated because, again, really nobody's at a 7% anymore. But if you got down to 6.5, which is roughly where we are today, like I said, 6.4, 6.5, that saved you $132 a month. So a big difference on that half point. So imagine what would happen if you went down significantly from that 6.5. Now, if you were going to wait for just natural rates to get down significantly, let's say I wanted a rate at 5%. That's going to make a huge difference. That's a full 1.5 instead of just a point. You're going to have to wait, I'm going to guess 2 to 3 years. Something like that. And who's to say? I mean, who knows? Projecting 2 to 3 years out in the future at this point, regardless of your politics or whatever you think, the world's crazy. So I can't even imagine how long you would have to wait to get down to a natural 5% interest rate that you're just going to get for just being a person that can qualify. So you'd have to wait a very long time. Again, this is some of these projections. This is showing, I think Fannie Mae is the most aggressive. but they're projecting that we're not even going to get down to a flat 6 until close to the end of 2026. They're saying basically third quarter of 2023 or 2026. So they're saying a year and a half, and we still might not even be in the 5s. So, again, if I'm sitting here today in basically quarter 3, 2025, we're at 6.4. So they've kind of gotten this right, 6.4, 6.5. So it looks like Fannie Mae is the most on target here. Let's say theirs continue. Again, I'm going to wait another year and a half. I'm going to be renting, lighting money on fire. And in the meantime, my rates really haven't gone down that much. They've gone down another half of a point, something like that. And again, who knows? These are all projections, but nobody's thinking that this is going to all of a sudden get aggressive and we're going to get down in the interest rates in the 4s or anything like that. And here's an idea of what that could look like if you take advantage of those concessions, those things that we have now because of where the inventory is, because of where interest rates are. So this is a side-by-side comparison, and I know there's a ton of numbers on here, so I kind of made some arrows to make this easier to read. The one on the left, this is $350,000. So let's say this is today. This is a kind of a starter home or a nice townhome or something that I could get in today. $350,000, my monthly payment could be $2,227. Okay. Now, this is because I could get a 4.25%. I'm going to talk about how you can do that. But today, you could 100% get a 4.25% interest rate on a home. Okay. More importantly, I could easily get the seller to cover 10 grand of my closing costs. So that means my out-of-pocket could be about 14. This is just a basic FHA loan. This is not any kind of like down payment assistance. There's a lot of other ways around this. So I'm not saying this would be for everybody. I'm just giving you a side-by-side example. This one on the right, let's say that we waited. Okay. So let's say we waited. Let's say that homes went down about another 8%, which is fairly aggressive. So now we're down to 325. So our natural purchase price has come down 25%. Now, this is probably looking at somewhere around a year and a half, something like that, because we have our interest rate now at 5.25. And really, nobody's even projecting in a year and a half that interest rates are going to be in the low 5s. So I'm being kind of generous here and saying that, a year and a half, let's assume the prices went down 8%. Let's assume that we've gotten down lower than we thought we would in interest rate. And now I don't have to do buy downs or I don't have to do any of these other concession things. I can just get a 5.25. So even though my purchase price has gone down 25%, even though my interest rate has dropped down to 5.25, my payment is still $2,261, which is more than what I could get today. More importantly, the seller's not as motivated to make concessions. So my closing costs are actually higher because instead of doing $10,000, now they're probably going to reduce that down to $5,000. So this person waiting this year and a half, now they got a lower price on their house, but think about how much money they wasted in this year and a half, and their monthly payment's still not better, and their closing costs probably still aren't better. And this is, I always hate to say for sure this is what's going to happen, but this is most likely what's going to happen for people that want to wait for the next year and a half. So again, why is that? I'm going to give you some examples of stuff that I get on a daily basis, okay? This is a resale home. Now, what is the listing agent's job in this situation? They're trying to sell this house for the most amount of money, get their seller the most amount of money. This is how motivated this seller is right here. Seller will assist buyer with closing costs, okay? So that means right up front, they're telling you, we're going to give you money towards closing costs. We're going to give you money towards buying down your interest rate. And this is in their thing. This isn't like, oh, you're interested? Okay, I'll tell you these things. This is just, hey, we're putting this in your inbox. Please get me a buyer. Builders are doing absolutely insane things. These are just two examples of stuff that I've gotten from builders in the last couple of days. Okay. So this one is what's called a 2-1 buy down program. So essentially the first year is artificially lower at 2.75. The second year, it's going up to 3.75. And then the third year and moving forward for the rest of the term, 4.75. Now, I'm always cautious with kind of gimmicky short-term things. But again, if we're capping out at 4.75, and in the first 2 years, we're getting even less than that, who cares? 4.75 is still infinitely better than what you're going to be getting anytime soon. If you waited for 2 years, I don't think you're going to get a 4.75. So you're already going to be there for the rest of this loan. And in the first 2 years, you're making even less of a payment. Plus, you can see here, receiving up to 3% in closing costs. So we're going to artificially buy down your interest rate down to places that it hasn't been naturally in 4 years. And we're going to pay all your closing costs. Okay. So that's one of them. On this one, on FHA, they're doing a flat locked in. This one's not a tiered. It's not a 2-1. This is just locked in 30-year loans. Okay. 3.75%. On VA, 3.75%. And on conventional, depending on how much you're putting down, anywhere between 3.9 and 4.8. Okay, these are locked in. These are 100% locked in. And I get these literally every day from builders right now, because builders would rather take some cash, use it to buy down interest rates, as opposed to actually dropping the prices. They want to keep the prices where they are, so they will incentivize you. But really, again, like I said, if I can get a 2.75% interest rate, that's probably worth $100,000 of dropping the price. It's a huge, huge difference, probably more than that, depending on exactly how much the price is. Okay. This is another one that I got from a builder, and I'll just share this with people. They're offering not just stuff towards the buyer, but they're saying, hey, we'll give the agents more money than we usually do. Now, some agents are just going to take that additional commission and say, great for me, I made more money, even though I did the same amount of work. For us personally, if they're going to give us more than what we charge, we're going to give the rest to you. So in this situation, you could be getting money from the builder and then also part of that commission, because we charge what we charge. We don't care what they want to give us, so we'll give it to you guys. This is the unique trend. I mentioned that there's some unique trends with new homes, and new homes aren't for everybody. Maybe they're not in the area that you want to be or whatever. But if you can make them work right now, they're more affordable than they've been in a decade. So this is just showing you the difference between a median new home and a median existing home. And new homes are always more expensive. Always, 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 for almost ever in real estate. Right now, they're not. And part of that is because of the prices. Part of that is because of the incentives. But now is a really, really amazing time for people to get in some affordable homes. There are going to be people sitting here in a year or a year and a half saying, oh, I'm so glad I waited. I got that 5.9% interest rate. It finally went underneath 6. And they're going to go buy a home, and they're going to be paying a much higher interest rate than what people are getting today, because those incentives are going to go away. And B, prices are going to go back up again on these new homes, because there's going to be a flood of buyers that were all doing the same thing. So one question I get, what do I need an agent for if I'm going to go buy a home from a builder? Well, you do. So first of all, this is a national survey, and they basically just said, who was more useful? Was it your agent or was it the builder representative? And across the board, on every category and every question, they said their agent was. And if you think about it, it makes sense, because if I'm representing a buyer buying a new build, I'm just representing them. That's all I'm doing. I'm just representing my client. I'm worried about their interest. For the builder rep, first of all, they don't represent you in any way. Now, they're trained in customer service, so they want to be nice. They want to make it seem like they're your friend. But legally speaking, they represent the builder and the builder alone. They cannot legally represent the other side. So they're not supposed to lie to you, depending on the builder. That sometimes does or doesn't happen. But they're definitely not going to tell you things that they don't need to tell you. They are employed by the builder. They represent the builder. Their legal duties are owed to them. So you should always take an agent, because they're going to pay our commission in the first place. Not always, but again, that's another conversation that we can get into. But it doesn't really cost you anything. What it's going to cost you if you don't take them is that now you're basically going to court without an attorney. That's kind of what the natural thing is there that you're doing. So again, my advice, get in it, utilize some of these concessions now. But let's say you can't. Let's say I signed a 12-month lease I can't get out of. Let's say I have some kind of a work situation where I don't qualify right now. Great. Let's talk about some tips on how you can get there. So pay your bills on time. Obviously, that seems fairly simple, but really important. Late payments can be absolutely devastating towards getting qualified for loans. So you really want to make sure you're paying things on time. Pay down your debt, but here's the biggest thing. We have these conversations with people. We do free one-on-one consultations with people just to kind of talk about the idea of buying a house in the future. You really want to make sure that you're dealing with a lender, and we can refer you to really good lenders, because you don't want to just pull your credit report and then say, okay, oh, this debt, I need to pay this down. You really want to have a lender take a look at it, because they're going to be able to tell you what matters and what doesn't. Certain debts, if your payment's very, very low, doesn't really matter, because all they're counting against your DTI is the monthly payment. They're not counting the entire balance. So I could have $200,000 worth of student loans, but if my monthly payment that I have to make, my minimum, is $150, that's not really hurting me as bad as a $10,000 thing that has a $500 payment, because the payment is really more so the thing. And you want to be really careful with credit reports as well. If you just go pull a credit report, depending on how you do it, the credit bureaus have kind of tried to convince people that you have a credit score. you don't really have a credit score, you have a credit profile. This is why your credit score can be different at different bureaus. It can be different based on who pulls it. I've seen people that went and got a car loan and a home loan, or applied for a car loan and a home loan on the same day, and had drastically different scores. So you don't really want to do these things on your own, because credit is kind of inherently tricky and not always necessarily intuitive. So, come talk to us. We can get you hooked up with the right people that can kind of make sure that you're making a plan of attack and doing this in the right way, because it's really disappointing for people when they say, "Oh, I've been working on my credit for, 6 months, 9 months. I think I'm ready to go buy." And then they go talk to a lender, and the lender says, "Oh, I'm sorry, you have these problems." And it's because they attacked it and they were doing the right things, but they just did it in the wrong way, because it's a little hard to understand sometimes. Oops. Okay. So again, how can we help you get there? We have access to some great lenders with little to nothing down. There's all kinds of different loan programs out there right now that are helping people. We are a total concierge service. We have access to vendors, inspectors, whatever you need. We actually just had a listing that we helped them get a fourth bedroom done. We got all the work done and everything, and kind of helped them out. So we can kind of help you A to Z, whatever you need. Part of this, if you would like it, we're going to be sending you our free buyer's guide. Takes you from A to Z, just everything you need to know to get into a home, whether that's a new home or existing home, doesn't make any difference. And like I mentioned to you, a free one-on-one consult. And this is really just to see what makes sense for you, because my advice is never the same for every single person. Your work situation, how long you intend to stay in Vegas, your family situation, all these things factor into what makes sense. But we'll always sit down and just kind of make a plan of attack. And if it works out, great. If not, at least you got some better information. So I promised you guys some free stuff. Okay, so here's the first one. We are trying to make this as easy as it can be for people. I don't want to see people sitting here in a year and a half or 2 years saying, "God, I wish I would have bought when I could have gotten these crazy, 3.5, 4% interest rates. And now I waited it out, and yeah, I got one that's below 6, but I really kind of missed the boat." So we're going to make this as easy as possible for people. Anybody who buys a house with the Meyer team before the end of 2025, we're going to take care of your appraisal up to $700. So you're going to have a free appraisal. That's one less out-of-pocket expense you have to worry about, and it's not a tax write-off, so we're not hurting your taxes. Here's the other thing we are doing. We have partnered with Vegas Roots Rescue. They are an amazing rescue here in town. We have been really excited to do this, and we will now be doing a dog with every home sold. So if you are ready to adopt a dog and you have to qualify with them, they have some criteria. They obviously want to make sure that it's the right situation for you, and that the dog's going to be taken care of. But for every home that we sell, and this isn't just 2025, this will be moving forward. We're always looking for ways to kind of up our charitable stuff, and this is a great cause. So we will be doing a dog with every home sold. Now, if you're not ready for a dog, or if you don't want a dog, or you don't like dogs, totally fine. What we're going to do is, in lieu of paying for those donation or those adoption fees for you, we're just going to donate that exact same amount in your name. So it'll be your tax write-off. But with each person that purchases with us, we're going to either get them a dog if they're ready and they qualify, or we're going to make a donation in their name to Vegas Roots. And we just really appreciate them. If you follow our social media, you'll see more stuff on this. And it's just a good partnership that we're hoping grows and just brings some more awareness to a problem that we have here in the Valley. So if you'd like to talk more, here's the contact information. This is my cell phone, email, and our website. Again, would be happy to sit down and talk to you, answer any questions that you have. Just want to try to be of service, and appreciate your time. I'm going to probably do the Q&A off the recording, because just sometimes that's useful, sometimes it's not. But again, any questions that you have, please feel free, reach out, and I appreciate your time.